Hey, this is Carrie from Breaking Night Press, and today we have an interview with romance author and disability advocate Katie Mettner. Katie, would you like to share a little of your background?
Sure. Well, if you can't tell from my accent, I'm from northern Wisconsin.
Don't you know?
You betcha, yeah, hey.
Sorry, I had to. Please don't cancel us, Wisconsin. Full disclosure, we're friends, and that's just our dynamic.
It's okay. We're cheeseheads here. We embrace it. It's a thing. It's all good.
So, you live in northern Wisconsin.
Yes, I grew up in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is about an hour south from where I live right now. And fun fact, Eau Claire is famous for producing Justin Vernon of Bon Iver. His sister was my babysitter when I was a little girl. So there are my 6 degrees of separation for you.
Well, check you out. You know, he's probably telling people that his sister babysat a famous author now.
Not likely, but maybe in another dimension.
Hey, in time, I'm sure. Now, in your bio, you mentioned living out your own happily ever after, which is really something coming from a romance author. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, who doesn't want to talk about their awesome husband who they've been married to for 21 years? My happily ever after has been with my husband, Dwayne. We met online at Thanksgiving time and we dated for, are you ready?
Yes.
2 months.
2 months.
That's right, baby. We met at Thanksgiving, got engaged on New Year's, and we were married in April.
Wow, he locked that down.
Hey, when you find perfection, you can't let it slip through your fingers. I'm kidding. After that, though, we had 3 little mini me's all in a row, which was really hard when we had them. But I love that they have short age gaps now because it's obviously a lot easier as they get older.
You have 2 in college and 1 about to be, right? I know the youngest is 16.
Yeah, all my kids graduated a little early. My daughter is in her 3rd year of college for choral education, and she plans to teach elementary kids once she graduates. So my middle mini-me is not so mini anymore. He is 100% my vibe and attitude, however. He's 18 now, works as a CNA at a rehab center here in town. And he is going to nursing school. So that's why he's a CNA, because he had to get a CNA in order to go to nursing school. So it's like, I might as well use it. And so he will finish nursing school next year. So I want you to just think about this for a moment. He will be 19 and have a license to give you any kind of medication or save your life.
That's not horrifying at all.
Not even a little bit. Actually, I'm kidding. He's an awesome kid. And it's really hard to get men to go into nursing. But he's had some really strong role models in the family in nursing. And so, yeah, we're really proud of him for all his hard work.
Yeah.
And then my youngest, who you mentioned, is 16. He graduates from high school in May. And yes, he skipped a few grades, a few here and there. And on the same day that he got his driver's license, back in December, he was actually offered a full ride academic scholarship to UW-Madison for physics. So needless to say, yes, I don't know what physics does or what they are, it's something to do with math, which is not my strong suit. So, but yes, needless to say, he's going to UW-Madison in the fall. And there is my not so humble mom brag.
Hey, I would brag too. That is amazing. And somehow, while managing the kids' various advanced tracks, you've written how many romance novels in the past decade?
50, but only 42 are currently published. So, the rest are in line. But yes, 50.
Okay, now correct me if I'm wrong, but the vast majority of those featured characters with disabilities, correct? Right?
The vast majority, yes. Okay. They feature characters with disabilities that are either physical, mental, or emotional. To make it clear, however, the disability isn't the focus of the book, their love story is. I do make sure that the character is portrayed in a way that is true to their disability, both in their daily lives and in their relationships. So the character is never cured of their disability at the end of the book, since we all know that's nonsense and not grounded in reality. But my biggest goal when writing disabled romance is to never shy away from the really hard and usually glossed over aspects of finding love as a person with a disability. I pride myself on that because if a person with a disability is reading it, they'll expect me to touch on those topics that have to do with intimacy and, basic activities of daily living that could be different than how other people do them. But if an abled person is reading it, then my goal is to give them the sense of what it's like to live as a person with a disability, and not just in the inspirational, oh, look, you left the house today kind of way. Yes, we've heard that comment many times. So many books that have characters with disabilities in them, they're so inaccurate. And I just decided when I started writing that I would try to make them as true to life as I could. And I know it's fiction and I'll never get it completely right, but that's kind of always my goal, is just to make sure that I at least touch on all the important topics and subjects that should be addressed in these types of novels. Because, when I became disabled and I was looking for books that would kind of represent and help me with what I was trying to learn as a person with a disability, the books that I could find were so inaccurate that they didn't help me. They actually hurt me. And so I decided, they always say, write what you want to read. And so that was basically my first goal with my first book was, all right, I'm just going to write. And, and still, it's still fiction. And let's face it, you still write things that, obviously you're never going to, go off on Wisconsin Point and, write a ATV up to, face down a bad guy. But you can make the story fun and still make it true to what the character with the disability is.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And like we shared on social the other day, Corinne Davies.
Yeah.
You know what? Google her. Her name's Corinne. She started the OwnVoices hashtag. Okay. I don't speak Dutch. I tried. I looked it up on YouTube. I looked up pronunciations and I failed. Okay, so it basically describes books where the protagonist and the author share a marginalized identity. And do you feel comfortable sharing more about that and how your books sort of fit into that particular niche?
Absolutely. I've never made it a secret that I'm also disabled. I've been a left below knee amputee for 10 years after living with the debilitating leg injury for 25 years before that. I broke my leg when I was 13 skiing. Downhill skiing. I broke it on the bunny hill the first time down the hill. Go me.
Oh my gosh.
That's my story. Nobody told me how to stop. So I thought it'd be a good idea to just fall over, and that was not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
I repeat, that was not a good idea. So that's the reason that I'm a below knee amputee. And then I also have gastroparesis, which basically means my stomach is paralyzed and it doesn't grind up the food or move it through the digestive system like it's supposed to. So last summer, I had a feeding tube placed in my intestines because I had lost nearly 100 pounds. And since I didn't have another 100 pounds to give up, I decided it was probably time to do something. And so now all my nutrition comes through a formula that I pump into my small intestines every night. And let me tell you, it's not super satisfying to the palate, but it does keep me alive in writing. So it's a little give and take.
Yeah, that is the important thing. Gosh. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I know it feels unnatural to talk about your private life in such a public forum, especially as an author, because the spotlight's typically, focused on your work, but it does tie in with what we're discussing today.
Right. And, I've never made that a secret. I'm just really glad that you didn't cue up inspirational music and tell me how brave I am or how awesome it is that I managed to get dressed today and form a sentence. Okay, that was sarcastic, but that we do hear that a lot is often the case for people with disabilities.
Yeah, well, thankfully I've known you long enough to avoid that particular trap, but that's a good segue to our first topic, which is the portrayal of people with disabilities in fiction. Now, first I'll ask, have you seen any accurate portrayals lately? Books, TV, movies, games, anything?
I really, really wish I could say that I have. And I know that there are several authors out there who include characters with disabilities in their stories, and I have not necessarily read them, but they are also not disabled themselves, but have a disabled child or a disabled spouse. And I do have their books queued up on my Kindle to read as soon as I finish with a couple of sensitivity reader beta books that I'm doing right now. But as far as Hollywood goes, no, Hollywood really sucks at representing people with disabilities in an accurate way. Me Before You is such an abomination that it never should have seen the light of day. Take my word for it. We are not all suicidal. It's just ridiculous that it became such a huge thing when the majority of the plot revolved around poor, pitiful Paul, or I don't even know what his name was. I refuse to have anything to do with it.
Oh, well, how do you really feel about Me Before You? I've never.
You're right. I rescind the word sucks. I replace it with incredibly revolting. How about that? It also was completely uneducated when it comes to representing people with disabilities. At least for the most part, it was. The thing is, it's not an uncommon situation in books, TVs, movies, or games. Games can get away with it a little bit more because usually, I mean, I'm not a gamer. My kid is, but I'm not. But usually most of the games that have characters with disabilities, or I don't even know if you really would call it that necessarily, is they're the sci-fi games and the games that, you have a broader brush to do that with. I actually did watch a Christmas movie this winter where the main heroine was a character with a disability.
Oh.
She was also an actress with a disability. So the character with disability was played by an actress with disability, and that is rare as all get out. So I was into this. I was primed to get into the meat of this new relationship. And, I'm sitting there with my popcorn, not really because I can't eat popcorn, but you know what I mean. And by the end of the movie, I mean, I'm sitting there and just kind of staring at the screen, and my husband's laughing at me because he knows exactly what I'm thinking. But the end of the movie, we still don't know why she was in a wheelchair. We don't know what her disability was. We don't know how it's going to affect the new relationship with the guy she just met 4 days ago.
Oh.
We don't know anything. It was mind-boggling because they missed the ball so completely that they weren't even in the ballpark. And they had this huge opportunity. I mean, they had a 90-minute movie that they could have used to educate. And they didn't have to do it in a way that scared people. And they didn't have to do it in a way that made it super inspirational. Let's break out the violins. But they just ignored it completely, which was the biggest problem because she didn't have an invisible disability. It was very clear that she used a mobility aid, but there was no mention of it whatsoever. And while I agree with that to a point that you don't focus on the disability, obviously, in whether it's a book or a movie or whatever it may be, you still have to acknowledge it. Yeah. And that's what they missed. They missed acknowledging it. And that as a disabled person doesn't give disabled representation.
Right.
They wanted her to just be like every other, romance heroine, which she was to a point, but also she can't be.
Yeah.
And they didn't own that. They didn't own the fact that she was unique. And it was like they got the lead solo in the High School Musical. They went to all the practices and then they forgot to show up for opening night. And ultimately, I think it wasn't a bad movie. Don't get me wrong. If you were just watching it without any expectations, but if you went in thinking that you were going to get representation, you were going to be disappointed.
It's like they liked the idea of it, but they didn't want to, acknowledge any of the implications.
Exactly, because they'd lose viewership, and that was a fear for them. I did like that. I did enjoy seeing that we had a lead character with a disability being played by an actress with a disability, because that's a start. It was a start. And I think that was, it wasn't a bad story. Don't get me wrong. It was about a romance writer who fell in love. And I mean, hey, I'm all over that.
Yeah.
But it missed so many opportunities that they could have used to educate people in a setting that was very comfortable, that you were very comfortable in. Ultimately, that's going to be something that they'll have to work on, is just, not being afraid to do it in a way that is worked into the story to make it
authentic,
make sense. Yeah, make it authentic. Exactly. Just to make it make sense, because this did not make any sense. It just didn't.
Right. Okay. So building on that disappointment, what do you think some of the most common pitfalls are when it comes to writing characters with disabilities?
Oh, I think the biggest pitfall, if the author is not an OwnVoices author, is not doing enough research to discover that the plot they want to write is not realistic for someone with that particular disability. For example, people see amputees out there running around doing all kinds of Paralympic activities that are awesome, but also nowhere near a full representation of the disability. For instance, they don't see the multiple different set of prosthetic legs that they have, the team of prosthetists they need to keep those prosthetics in working order, the hours spent in the prosthetist's office for fittings, custom liners that need to be made to protect their limbs, the time that they can't wear their prosthesis because the limb was injured anyway. The fact that they take their prosthetic off at night to sleep, then they shower sitting down on a bench, and they use a wheelchair or crutches or whatever it may be when they aren't wearing their prosthesis. It's all of those little behind the scene things that authors miss when they're writing that ends up skewing the portrayal of what someone with that particular disability actually goes through on a daily basis. Now, you do not have to go through them all, but I think the biggest pitfall is when you find out how hard it is to write a character with a disability accurately. And because it's hard and it takes a lot of time, then you decide you've done enough research to know how to write it when you actually haven't. And so I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I have found, where there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of authors that do a lot of research. Don't get me wrong. They really research it hard, and they still
there are just some things you can't
there's
glean.
Just right, if you don't live it, or you don't know somebody, or you can't bounce things off somebody, it's really, really hard to just get that from research. And so when I write, I'll spend hours researching, and oftentimes what I'll do is I already know what I want the next book is I want to write. So while I'm writing a manuscript, on my off time when I'm not writing, I'm watching TV or whatever I'm doing, with my husband, I will be researching the next book and whatever disability that character will have, because sometimes it's the only way, you just kind of have to take it in bits and pieces. And then even when I start writing the story, I stop, I check, I double check before I take a plot line down a specific avenue. Trust me, my doctors, they are totally used to me asking some random weird question at the end of every visit I go to, because
I would love to see their notes on you.
Trust me, they are so used to it. They're just like, do you have any questions? And I'll be like, as a matter of fact. And it's never about me, trust me. So, but I've learned, and that's how you take advantage of those like little types of situations where you're talking to somebody, you're like, hey, you might know the answer to this question. So I do that. And I also, the thing that's really, 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 really kind of boggles my mind is when they have the character's disability cured at the end of the book, because the hero says they should be cured. Stop it. That's nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. There are able people. Yeah. And there are able people who fall in love with disabled people all the time, who support and love them without trying to fix, quote unquote, them. And so I think that those are some of the biggest pitfalls, is not doing enough research and then making sure that their, quote unquote disability, or, whatever it is that's wrong with the character, is cured at the end of the book, so they can go on and live a happily ever after, because apparently you can't have a happily ever after if you're disabled. And so ultimately that's my biggest crux, is to make sure that when somebody finishes a Katie Mettner novel, they know, hey, you know what? They're happily, they got their happily ever after.
Yes.
And they still have their disability. Shocker, I know.
Well, those are some absolutely valid points. And I know we've covered this on the blog, but authors aren't the only ones perpetuating these notions. Prior to signing with us, your work was met with some pretty, let's say, harsh responses from traditional publishers.
Yeah, harsh would be kind.
Kind like
I have lost track of how many manuscripts I submitted to publishers, and was either told, you can't write romance that way. That's one of my favorite ones. You can't write romance that way. Well, I did. Or, we really like the story, but could you make the character less, or #not disabled? Yeah, I always just, I would just I would get mad, don't get me wrong, but I would just shake my head, because you can't really like a story and then at the same time asked for the main character not to be disabled, because that would change the entire dynamic and make the plotline non-existent.
Yeah.
So you can't actually like it, but want it to be something else.
Yeah.
And I don't understand the fear of characters with disability or disabled people in the industry, because it's I guess I can't understand it, because they either go full on me before you, and that has become such a saying for me, because everybody understands what I mean when I say that. So they either want you to go full on me before you, or they want to make sure that the character with the disability has 2 lines and then you never see them again. And so it's very frustrating, to say the least, and aggravating every time, not just because I am a person with disabilities, but because you know that it's most likely, I can't say every time, but most likely when you're getting that feedback from somebody, it's coming from a person, the viewpoint of someone who doesn't live with a disability.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of rudeness to it too.
Yikes. That is just yikes. That is my profound response.
That's your profound
to that.
statement.
Yeah, because I'm just sitting here just like, yikes.
and let me take a break here, because for just a second, and I want to talk about the term ableist, because the statement I said about someone who, that feedback coming from somebody who likely doesn't live with a disability, a lot of people they're tossing around this term called ableist, and you'll hear it many times. It'll be used within the disabled community, and the abled community too, but they're referring to someone who doesn't have a disability. But you will never hear me use the word, for one simple reason, and that is that it implies that what they are saying or doing, whatever it may be, is on purpose. And that is rarely ever the case. So instead of saying, oh, they're just being an ableist, I try to come at it from the point of saying, having an opportunity to educate them instead. Because oftentimes they don't know that they're not supposed to do that, or say that, or, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I try to use it, like I said, use it as an opportunity to educate, instead of, just going, oh, well, they're being an ableist, and walk away.
Well, that's probably the healthiest mindset. I mean, for you, for the world at large. I mean, you could be making a ripple.
Right.
There.
And I mean, sure. And there is that small population of people out there who are saying or doing things on purpose just to be a jerk. Let's face it. That's human nature. But I just kind of learned over time that most people legitimately don't know that they shouldn't come up to me at the grocery store and tell me what an inspiration I am to be out shopping in a wheelchair.
Oh,
and I've heard this more times than I can count, but at the same time, I don't think that they're coming from a place of anything other than well-meaning. They're trying to connect. They're trying to be encouraging. They're coming at it from their own experience of whatever their generation has dealt with, but they aren't purposely being unkind. And I'm pretty good at picking out the people who really want to engage, or the people who are just being jerks.
Yeah.
And it, like, say, the people who park in, don't have a disabled parking sticker, but they park in accessible parking places or on the slanted lines just to quickly run in and grab something. And they know they shouldn't, but they just don't care enough about the person who might actually have to get a wheelchair out of their vehicle to go on and find a different place to park.
Boo those people. Just everybody take a moment and collectively stare in their direction so they feel it.
Menacingly. Okay, moving on. Now, back to the publishers and my point about the ableist mentality, and I was getting there.
We have a tendency to
meander. So, okay, this is where I struggle with being able to educate when it comes to the publishers, because if you get a rejection letter or we want the character to be less disabled, how do I educate them about that? I can't, because I don't get to email them back. I have to, work through a secondary system, or I have to re-upload my manuscript and then wait for them to contact me again, and blah, blah, blah. But also, I am not going to plead my case with them. If they can't see that the book would need an entire rewrite if the character wasn't disabled, then I don't want them publishing my books.
Yeah, that's problematic, and that's a red flag.
Exactly. And the same goes for, other publications in the industry too. I had an article that I wrote and was published, and it was written specifically about writing disabled characters. And it was my article alone, had my name as the only name on the author line. And they did some editing to it. And then they published the article after they did editing to it without running it past me. But they didn't add their editors' names to the byline either. So I guess really what upset me was that wasn't that they did it, because I mean, obviously everybody's going to, run things through their editors, but that they didn't then come back to me and say, hey, would you look this over and make sure that everything is, how you want it to be? Because there were parts of it that I would have right away said, no, 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 no. But what also disturbed me was that some would actually think that was okay to say that about a person with the same disability that I have. And it was so disparaging that I can't repeat it, because I can't, but it would have made anyone who had been in that same situation or had that situation happen to them feel incredibly bad about themselves. It was just one of those things that it upset me to the point that was kind of frozen internally as I'm reading it. And I broke out. I was really excited to read it, of course, because I was like, oh, this is going to be a great article. And I just broke out into cold sweat, and I'm thinking to myself, did I forget that I wrote this? What? Because I knew, I had written the article. And I just wanted to curl up in a ball, knowing that people were thinking that I wrote that. And that was just, and in the end, it was straightened out, and they changed their policy about how they edit their articles and such. But it was just another example of the industry not understanding how to accurately represent people with disabilities. And so that, and I was glad that I was in a way, even in my, frozen fear, was able to, get through my side to them and say, this is why you can't do this.
Yeah.
And then it changed that policy. So,
well, I'm glad you spoke up. And in that vein, if you had a suggestion for authors and publishers alike, at least one actionable step they could take today to make better, more informed decisions in these areas, what would it be?
Sometimes I think a lot of what occurs is simply ignorance to what the disabled community lives with. But a lot of that could be changed with simple people first ideas. And I say people first ideas because before you can think about people first language, which is something people probably hear about, you have to think about people first. So we're people first, and our disability factors into who we are, but it isn't who we are. I think for authors, my biggest suggestion would be to answer your question. If you don't know anything about a disability, i.e. you don't know someone you can ask questions of, you've never met anyone with a disability, you don't know how to use people first language, etc., then sometimes it's better to just back away from the idea. If you don't think you can do it well, then sometimes it's just better to go, okay, I'm going to back away from that idea. If you're going to write a character with disabilities, definitely you need to find yourself some sensitivity readers or a reader with the same disability who can go through your draft before you edit it. And I say before because you will be making changes. I can promise you, I still do it. You'll be making changes. And I do a lot of sensitivity reading. And like I said, it comes down, it just doesn't, they'll tell me all the research they did, and I can still, to help them improve the story just with simple people first language. For publishers, this is my biggest suggestion.
Okay.
Stop asking able people to write disabled characters. I'm going to say that again because it's that important. Stop asking able people to write disabled characters. There are so many of us OwnVoices authors who are submitting stories and constantly being turned down while the publishers are publishing manuscripts that are an abomination to the disabled community. I'm not saying that all abled authors can't write a good book with a character with disabilities in it. So far, I haven't found one, at least not from the big publishing houses. For God's sakes, this is my second piece of advice. Hire some sensitivity readers and listen to the reviewers when they say you've missed the boat again. Stop it. Get some help.
Thank you, Michael Jordan. I'm sorry, that sounded insensitive. For those of you who don't know, Katie ended by quoting a PSA turned meme, which she knows I can't resist.
Stop it. Get some help.
Sabotage. Anyway, yes, all of those things. What about something we as readers can do to help with the effort?
I think one of the most important things able readers can do when they're reading books of characters with disabilities is to remember that not every book is going to be factual. It's going to depend on who wrote the book and who published the book.
Yeah.
Also, to try to remember that you can't cure disability with love. I know, but that's not how any of this works. Okay.
You mean True Love's kiss isn't real?
No, I mean, not in the respect that my leg will grow back. Okay.
Okay.
The second thing I think readers can do to help the effort is to use people first language. And if you don't know what people first language is, I have a disability resource page on my website at www.katiemettner.com. There's my plug, where I go into more detail about it. I think it's also on the BNP website.
Yes.
Okay. And it's also printed in the back of Butterflies and Hazel Eyes, and which is my first book that I'm releasing with Breaking Night Press. So it introduces you to the concept of people first language and what we as the disabled community use for preferred terms. Then you can use that language when writing reviews or discussing books on social media and in book clubs. And I'm sure people are thinking, why does it matter? And so I will answer that. I once got a review on a book where the reviewer said the character was deformed. And the character in question has burn scars from an accident. So all I could think was, how would you like to have scars or a disability and then come along and read something like that in a book review?
Yeah.
No one does. So I think it's just staying cognizant when you're writing or speaking that you aren't using terms that you wouldn't want someone else to use about yourself or about you.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a pretty simple idea that, be kind.
Yeah. And I think some readers tend to forget people all over the world are turning to their words for insight about this book or this product or anything. It's not just a thought bubble that's sent out into the ether. It's seen, and it is seen for years.
You nailed it. Exactly. You can hate a book, but you should still be respectful toward the real people reading the review. I get a lot of reviews about where a reviewer will say the disability was overplayed. For example, I have a Christmas book where the main character is a brittle asthmatic, and I'm talking hospital bad asthmatic, where if he gets a really bad attack, he's going to the hospital. He accepts it, he jokes about it, he pokes fun at himself about it. But when he has an asthma attack, everything comes to a halt while he treats it, obviously.
Yeah.
Meaning everything has to be put to the side while he does a nebulizer treatment or gets treatment in the ER, whatever it is. But this is definitely not an over dramatization of a disability. This is a real thing, and real people die from this all the time. I actually had a doctor who spent as much time in the hospital for her asthma as she did at the hospital treating patients.
Wow.
Yeah. So my point is, and I'm getting there, I promise, is this: I will never, have never, will never overplay a disability for book plot. If you read one of my books, you can be assured that the information about the disability that is within the book is a very real situation that someone with that disability has dealt with at some point in their life. Full stop. That's all I'm going to say. If you do not know someone who has the condition, I understand that. But then absorb the information, because you never know when you might come across someone at the mall in the middle of a major asthma attack who needs help. And you remember Shep, and you think, I know what to do. This is what I need to do. And that is my goal. I just want my books to help people make this world a little bit better place, even if it's something as simple as empathy. And to be clear, I respect the heck out of a bad review as much as I do a good one. I do. But I struggle when the language is used when the language uses derogatory towards others who might also come by and come along the book page.
Yes.
So I guess it comes down to the lesson that we learned when we were kids, that words hurt, so pick them carefully.
Yeah, exactly. And for everyone listening and trying to take notes, don't worry. Katie has made us a lovely little table for our website. You can find it at www.breakingnightpress.com/resources. I will be updating the page as we receive more helpful tips, and not just from OwnVoices authors, but from readers who are a part of specific communities and cultures. If you're out there and you want to help educate us, don't hesitate to reach out. We are all about the learning here.
Absolutely. I have to say that Breaking Night Press's whole reason for existing is to elevate niche readers like myself, or writers like myself, who have great stories to tell, but we can't get the big publishers to see the forest for the trees. Throughout the whole process for every book that I'm working on with BNP, it's always been about staying true to who I am as a writer. And to try to explain that a little bit, it's not about making these books fit a trope or a genre. It's to make the book the best book it can be while staying true to what I write. And everyone that works with B&P, from editing to design, they grasp the importance of using people first language, making sure that we're bringing a book to the people that is honest, fair, beautiful, and tells the story of two characters who, they might have a lot more to overcome than another couple, but they still find their way to their happily ever after. And that is ultimately what we want in romance, right?
Yes. I mean, we try, and we certainly appreciate your kind words, as well as taking the time to be with us here today. So before you go, do you want to tell everyone about your upcoming release in April?
Well, yeah. Yes, Butterflies and Hazel Eyes is book 1 in the Butterfly Junction series, and it is set on the beautiful shores of Lady Superior near the Apostle Islands. Butterflies and Hazel Eyes is a romantic suspense. It features 2 characters with disabilities, Charity Puck, who is a little person, and Gulliver Winsome, who has limb length discrepancies. Charity is a white hat hacker and arrives at Gulliver's business, which is called Butterfly Junction, to try and figure out who's hacking into their servers to steal a formula for an eco-friendly pesticide that Gulliver is working on. He's trying to find a way to save the butterflies and bees from extinction and protect our waterways. And things happen, things get dangerous, people fall in love, and the whole thing is backdrop of beautiful Lake Superior and northern Wisconsin shores.
Well, I, for one, can't wait. I mean, I've read it, I've loved it, and I want to see the lake in person now.
I promise you, visiting any Great Lake is worth a trip, but visiting Lady Superior can be dangerous because she might convince you to stay.
Thanks for being with us, Katie. We had a great time today.
Thanks for having me. I can't wait to release Butterflies and Hazel Eyes for everyone to read.